now that we know the main parts of an essay, let's look at how an essay is shaped, specifically in our Western culture. And one of the most important things about its shape is the top and the bottom. And we remember from talking about the parts of an essay, that's our introduction and our conclusion. You'll notice with this shape, it's called the hourglass shape because it's kind of shaped like an hourglass, larger at the top, gets smaller in the middle, and larger again at the bottom. That the introduction and conclusion are different than that body. It starts wide, gets narrow, and then it's narrow down here and gets wide again. We want to think of those as being general statements moving to more specific statements. A general statement being, we live in the universe. A specific statement being, this ECPI campus is 555 Greenwich Road in Virginia Beach, Virginia. So general to specific. Now, how we move from general to specific in an introduction is very important, and it is a skill that when you attain it will help you in not only all your classes, but in all aspects of your life. We use deductive reasoning and deductive logic to get from that general to specific area. So we're going to learn a way of thinking and a way of moving from something wide to something narrow and specific. Why do we do this? Well, we do this because of what an introduction is supposed to do. When I ask students all the time, what does an introduction do? Of course, they say it introduces. But how and why does it introduce? An introduction, specifically the type that we're learning right now, is called a contextual introduction because it gives context to your essay. More specifically, context to your thesis statement, which is always the most specific sentence in the intro, which will be at the end. We'll talk about the thesis statement separately in another session. But we start with that general statement, and then we slowly move down to our thesis statement. Now, this gives that reader context. Again, using the solar system or universe model. You would start with the Milky Way and move down maybe to an address in Virginia. Or if you don't need to give quite that much context, you start with Earth and move down to an address. Maybe you want to give the context of a state. You move down to a city, a street, and then a number. But it gives that context. We always give context to people we have conversations with. And remember, the essay is a conversation. You don't just come home and tell somebody a specific line. Oh, that video we watched today in school was awesome. Well, what video? What class? What was the context of it? Was it you in the lounge watching a video with your friends in a movie? Was it in a criminal justice class where you were watching a specific video about how to find evidence and how to document evidence? So you have to give them context. It's like a joke. You don't ever just walk in and give somebody the punchline of a joke. You have to set that joke up. And what you do when you set it up is you give it context. So that's what we're doing when we construct an introduction. Now, the best model or image I've ever come up with to think about how this introduction works is something that we're all very familiar with. And that is how we arrange our folders and files on our computers. If you think about your desktop on your computer, you might have several folders and files. Some people have real crazy, messy desktops. Some people's are very neat. But let's imagine our desktop. Now let's think, okay, say on our desktop we have a folder that says games, one that says pics, one that says recipes, one that says school. So we double click on the one that says school, and in that we might have freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. In that we might have, major in general education, arts and sciences. You click on general education, you've got English, psychology, you've got communication or public speaking. You double click on English, you've got English 110, English 120. You double click on English 110, you've got paper 1, paper 2, paper 3. Double click on paper 2, you've got a rough draft, a revised draft, and a final draft. When you double click on that file that opens up in Word or whatever program you're using, that executable file, that would be the thesis. And you found it in the context of all those folders of that directory structure. So we think deductively. In fact, we built computers deductively because that's how we think. It's not the other way around. And an introduction is the same. Somebody didn't just say, oh, let's do this with introductions. An introduction naturally gives somebody context, just like when you would search for a file on your computer. Can you imagine trying to find a file on a computer that was not in any context, and if you did not have a search functionality, what would you have to do? You'd have to physically go through and look at every file until you found it. Your reader will be the same way if you don't give them the right context for that thesis. They're thinking, okay, maybe you're asking for a budget for some type of research to build some weapon for the military to help in some arena somewhere. Well, if you just say, okay, therefore we need this much money for this project, without giving them the context of what branch it was for, where this arena was, who you are, I mean, you got to give a lot of context. So this is how we do that. Now, this does take practice. Introductions or conclusions are probably, I'd say, especially in beginning writing, the hardest part of an essay. But the more you do it, the better you'll get at it. And as I said a little earlier, it will help you in other aspects of your life. To be able to deductively reason down to something, to be able to give somebody specific context in a short space of time. Imagine, somebody asks you a question and you can give them an answer but put it in a specific context. If you've ever talked to somebody who's just rolling around, they don't have a point, they never seem to get anywhere, they're not giving you context and leading you to any point. They're just going all over the place. Think about an employer, a prospective employer you might have. They don't want that. When they ask you a question, you need to be able to do it. I mean, for instance, you might have prepared maybe a 15-minute presentation or a proposal for somebody in your company, and then they come in and they say, look, you've got 2 minutes. You've got to be able to take that whole idea, put it in context, and get it somewhere very quickly. So this practice introductions will give you practice in critical thinking and deductive reasoning. Now, if you notice, our conclusion is flipped upside down from the introduction. Instead of going from general to specific, we start specific with the restatement of our thesis, which we'll look at later, and then we get more general. It's like we opened up all those folders. Now after you mess with the file, you need to close those folders back down to make that desktop neat. It's the same thing. When you open up a folder in your reader's head, say you start talking about money first. Everything that reader knows about money is up in their RAM. Then you start talking about the USA. Then you start talking about economy. Every time you get more specific, everything that they connect in their head to these ideas are going in that context. When you come back down here, you need to put it in a context. Now, do you have to put it in the exact same context that you started with? For some of our essays, especially our beginning ones, like a narrative essay, maybe just a simple process analysis, it probably will be close to the same context. But when we get to arguments later and when we talk about thesis and restatement, sometimes what you aim to do in writing is to take something that someone put in one context and put it in a new context, because that's how you change minds and get new things done. But we'll look at that a little later. To review for right now, let's remember that our essay is shaped like this hourglass structure, and that is because it starts general and moves specific in our introduction, and then starts specific with our restatement and moves general toward the end to put it in a new context. The intro and the conclusion is to start in context and to put in context. Later on, we're going to look at the thesis statement and the restatement, and I hope to see you there. I'll see you soon.